Is it safe to be doing this? Okay, so this story happened in the early spring of 2010, but I only discovered this sub a few weeks ago. Here is my story. My wife, 25 female, and I, 25 male, were headed up to my folks' cabin in the upstate New Hampshire for the weekend. We both had to work later than usual, so we knew we weren't going to be arriving until around 1 a.m. or so. This wasn't really a problem, since we lived in Massachusetts and the drive was typically only 4 hours or so depending on traffic. Now, the cabin itself is on a very small and very secluded lake, at the end of a dead and private dirt road. It's the very end of it. Its isolation is largely part of the appeal. There is no phone, and in order to get a cell reception, you have to drive a few miles into town. There is only one other house on our side of the lake, who is never around, and only 6 cabins in total on the entire lake, so it is pretty much about as secluded as you are going to get, in modern day New England anyways. As a matter of fact, in order to even get to our private road, you have to drive a mile down another dirt road, cross a causeway. It's basically a dirt road bridge that crosses a narrow point in the lake, and then take a fork in the road with signs that plainly states, dead end, private drive. And even then, it's another quarter mile to the cabin, so basically, this isn't the type of place people would typically stumble across. So, we get into town a little after 1 a.m. and swing through the nearby gas station, hoping to pick up some snacks for the rest of the night. However, not much to my surprise, the gas station was closed, but we had picked up beer before we left, so we could wait until morning to get supplies and still have a good night. Well, after circling around, as we were pulling out of the gas station, I noticed the lights of a pickup truck turn on at the back of the station. I didn't really think about it. I had no reason to. I was honestly just excited to get to the cabin and start the weekend. From the gas station, it's about 10 miles to the cabin, and all the roads are unlit and pretty rural. After a minute or so, I noticed headlights in my mirror and assumed it was the same truck I had seen at the gas station. I didn't mention it to my wife because I didn't really think they were following us and want to creep her out like that. But the more I thought about it, I thought it was really strange for the truck to just be sitting at the back of the gas station with its lights off. But after seeing the truck take the second turn behind us, I started to worry. It was almost 1:30 a.m. in the middle of nowhere. Why was this truck on the road? And more importantly, why is he taking the same 3, now 4 turns as me? This went on for about 5 minutes. As I approached the first dirt road that would take us to the cabin, I thought about driving past it and making a few random turns to see if it was really following us. However, part of me still thought I was being stupid and paranoid. Plus, I didn't want to alert my wife that I thought we were being followed. So I decided to make the turn, but I didn't use my turn signal. About 10 seconds later, I saw the truck turn in behind us. My alarm bells start going crazy. I can't stress enough how unlikely it would have been for someone other than us to be headed down this particular road, especially at this time of night. Like I said before, there are only 6 cabins on the lake. There are 2 chances to turn off towards other cabins before the fork to our private road, and I watched in utter dismay as the truck passed the first turnoff. "Is that your neighbor?" asked my wife. She had apparently been paying close attention to the truck as well. "No, I don't think so. I don't know who that is." Which was true. I could tell. The truck was dark and was raised up. My neighbor drove an older red pickup. Weird. Do you think they're following us? I don't know, probably not. Maybe they're lost. I could tell she was nervous by the tone of her voice, but I tried to play it cool and act like nothing was wrong, despite the fact that I was completely on edge. The second turn off came and went. The truck was still behind us. The causeway across to the other side of the lake was coming up, and after it was the fork that led to our cabin. Once you hit the causeway, the only chance you have to turn around is at the cabin itself. The 2 roads that fork off are not only dead ends, but they are 1 lane only, so you have to drive to the end and actually turn around in our driveway or my neighbor's. As we came up to the causeway, my heart sank. It was spring, so all the melted snow had raised the lake's water level way higher than I had thought it would be. Judging by how high the water was at the causeway, I knew our road would be flooded. Not just a few inches either. Sometimes after big storms this would happen, and we would have to park at the fork and then hike through the water to the cabin, and sometimes come back to the car with a canoe. I guess this is a good time to mention that I was driving a 2000 Golf GTI. When I got to the fork, my worst fear had come true. In my 25 years of coming to this cabin, I had never seen the road flooded like this. It literally flooded like the road had just ended and the lake began. It looked like a boat ran more than a road. The clearance on my car was about 5 to 6 inches, and I'd actually cracked the oil pan on this car by bottoming out on a rock the year before driving down this very same road. With the truck headlights coming up behind us, I was forced to make a decision. I could either stop the car and wait for the truck that had been following us into the woods in the middle of the night, carrying who the fuck knows up to catch up to us, or I could risk driving my car completely unequipped for off-road scenarios down a very flooded dirt road in the middle of the night. I dropped the car into second gear and drove into the water, hoping that it wasn't as deep as it looked. Fuck, the water was even higher than it looked after I got into it. At first, it came up to just beneath the headlights, and then when the road dipped, it came over the headlights, which killed 90% of my visibility. I looked out the passenger side window, and it looked like the lake came up to the edge of the car. It was just black, floating along through the middle of a black lake is the only way I can describe it. Is it safe to be doing this? My wife said, obviously scared. No, of course not. It was incredibly stupid to be doing what I was doing. What the fuck was I thinking? We didn't have a cell signal to call for help when we got stuck, or to call for help if the truck decided to follow us. Probably not, but I can't stop now, I said, and gave the car more gas. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw the truck just sitting at the mouth of our road, at the edge of the floodwater. I felt at that moment absolutely sick. Not only had it turned down my road, but it would also have a much easier time navigating the flooded road than my tiny little Golf. Plus, even if I'd made it, if they followed me, we would have nowhere to go. It was a dead end. I can't remember a time in recent memory I felt so helpless. I am not a big guy, so if there was more than one person in that truck, and they wanted to make trouble, they could. And they would have the perfect place to do it. I started to think of things I had in the car I could use as a weapon if I needed to, but I knew I didn't have anything I could get too quickly. Waves upon waves of regret and fear washed over me. It was really hard to gauge where the road was, but having driven down this road hundreds of times, and judging by the trees on either side of me, I knew the road would start to climb up soon, and hopefully the water wouldn't be as deep. I was right! After what felt like an eternity, I felt the car start to climb up and out of the water, uncovering the headlights. Inch by inch, the car climbed higher and higher until it was out of the water and on dry land. My heart almost burst out of joy. I checked my mirror again to see the truck, still just sitting at the beginning of the road. I punched the gas and ripped around the upcoming corner. At this point, I knew the road well and wouldn't be flooded again. But I was worried that after seeing my car make it through the water, that the truck would follow us. When we got to the cabin, I shut off the car and just waited for the truck's headlights to appear around the corner. They never came. After we got inside and locked the doors, we talked about how weird the whole encounter was, but I still tried to play it cool. Yeah, they must have been lost, and then decided to turn around after seeing the condition the road was in, I said. I made jokes about how stupid I was for driving through the water, but underneath it all, I was still freaked the fuck out and on high alert. Whoever was in the truck knew where we were, and knew it wouldn't be easy for us to leave. Hell, all they would have to do was park at the end of the road and wait for us. I spent the rest of the night listening for car engines and waiting for headlights to start coming down the road. After a few beers and a movie, we eventually fell asleep. But even then, it was not a restful sleep. I just lay awake in bed listening and waiting for sounds, with an axe by the door and my knife on the bedside table. It sucked. The next morning, I drove back down the flooded road, which was still really risky, and parked at the fork. The truck was nowhere to be seen, and no one bothered us for the rest of the weekend. It all turned out well, but it still ranks as the creepiest encounter I've ever had, or potentially had. All you can do is run. I was living in a quiet, largely suburban town last year, maybe 10 miles outside a major city. At the time, I walked to and from work, since I was only a few miles away from my house, and it was a quiet walk through most populated areas. There is one stretch of road towards the end of the walk that can be fairly unnerving at night, however. In the 8 months that I lived there, I never had a problem or encountered anything strange or anyone strange at night. But like we all know, the truth is that just because something bad hasn't happened yet, doesn't mean it won't. No matter what town you're in, bad things can absolutely happen. One night after work around 9 p.m., I stopped at a restaurant to watch some game and relax. Afterwards, I went forward to walk the last mile home. The creepy road I mentioned is a highway of sorts. 2 lanes on each side, guardrail, etc. The surrounding area is flat, barren, and surrounded by woods. It's a straight shot for about a quarter mile, so you can see what's ahead for the most part. A major highway runs above, so there is an overpass bridge to walk under. Fortunately, it's dimly lit, with no area for people to hide like some bridges have. I walked down the road and through the bridge with no issues. It was strangely quiet, even for a weeknight. No cars about, not even on the highway above. By the time I left the restaurant, it was approaching 11 p.m. So for a small town, that's not really a surprise, I suppose. After the bridge, I saw a male figure saunter out from behind an unlit, defunct gas station on the other side of the highway. The guardrail had ended by that point. At first, I thought he was just drunk and needed to take care of business behind the building after drinking all night and watching the game. So I kept walking, keeping my eyes on him. We were about 40 feet away from one another when he decided to cross the highway over to my side. My first thought was that he was a total drunk prick. As he sauntered across, he started to drift diagonally in my direction very slightly. I promptly began to cross over to the side he had come from, not for a second taking my eyes off of him. As we both reached the double line of the road, I realized he had drifted close enough that we were about 15 feet between us, and of course, no one was in sight. It was just completely silent and dark. A couple streetlights worth of light illuminated the road for a few hundred feet in the distance. Then he turned to face me, stopped in the middle of the road, and took 2 steps forward at me. At times like these, with no warning during those split seconds, different people do different things that are completely out of our control. We turn into animals. Some people freeze, some people scream, some people run. Through no will of my own, I happen to be someone who yells at the top of my lungs angrily. I was angry, alert, frightened, and angry. Surprising myself, I leaned towards him, pointed at him, and yelled, "Don't fuck with me!" At the top of my lungs, he froze, then immediately turned and walked away. Not moving my eyes from him, I continued to cross the street to the other side. All this happened in just a few seconds. I hung back to watch him walk about 100 feet before I was ready to trail behind him from the other side of the road. My panic subsided and I continued. I was now just a street away from my house, and watching him as he headed to another gas station across from my street. He put his hands on the windowsill and faced the building, staring down at his feet. I approached my street, which is conveniently directly across from where he was. There were only a few hundred yards left until I was at my house. I tried to disappear into the shadows on one side of the street so he wouldn't be able to see me from the gas station. Every 3 to 5 seconds as I walked, I looked back until the road curved and I could no longer see him. I still kept checking. nothing. As I was halfway down the road, I did another head check. And what I saw set my adrenaline into overdrive. He was at the end of my road, running at me fast. That was when I turned into a pure animal. I had no conscious control over what my body was doing. I had no time to think, but found myself sprinting faster than I'd ever run in my entire life. I never looked back, but knew he must have been gaining ground quickly. I'm female, 5'1", in shape, but of normal build. I can't outrun any man. I pushed harder and harder and began to turn the bend. Where my house is in view, my heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. The fear was pure and indescribable. And that's when I dropped my keys and phone out of my hand. That's right, like every bad horror movie anyone's ever made, I had approximately 0 time to decide what to do. But it's amazing what happens in a panic mode. Every option was instantly weighed in my head. If I go to pick it up, I close distance between us. But I can get into my house if I make it. I can call someone. If I don't pick it up, I save distance, but I may be locked out if my roommate isn't home, and will have to hide in the neighborhood and pray he doesn't find me. I lunged back and grabbed the keys and phone and turned a power sprint the last 70 or so feet to my house, before shakily and furiously opening a door in sheer terror and slamming it behind me. I checked every door and locked myself upstairs. I saw profusely. My heart didn't stop racing for a half hour. I'll never know if he got close enough to have grabbed me, because I never look back. But I do know one thing that really puts the cherry on the creepy cake. My bike in my backyard, which has been there for 8 months in that quiet neighborhood, was gone the next day. It really makes me wonder how many times he'd watched me walk home before. I've never traveled on foot alone at night, so. Don't follow vultures. When I was younger, about 10 years ago, I got into bird watching. I was about 12 years old, so it wasn't really official by any means. I was just some kid that liked to sneak up on birds, take pictures, and look them up in books. I decided to start this hobby by making a list with pictures I had printed from the library of native birds in my region. Every weekend, I'd wander around the neighborhood, which was suburbs, smashed hatingly against large plots of land covered in brush, in search of new birds. With a few ponds and a large creek in the area, I found quite a few within my first few weeks. However, there was one bird I had set as sort of my white whale, due to its rarity in the area: the black vulture. We have tons of turkey vultures in my area. They are most common, but much fewer black vultures. They are a bit hard to tell the difference if they're flying too high. The best was to determine which vulture it is has to do with how much gray-white in one of their wings. If they got closer, you can eventually make out the red head of turkey vulture, as I often did disappointingly. Unfortunately, I cannot remember the exact date or what month it was even. I believe sometime in the fall, however. But one weekend, I decided to spend the next 2 days searching high and low for the black vulture. I was climbing over the small wire fencing around a nearby brushy area, as per usual, and searched. Usually, you had the best luck finding scavenger birds on roadkill beside the road, and there so happened to be a small 2-lane winder that mirrored the creek nearby, just through the foliage. So, I cut across a sort of mini forest headed in that direction. As much as it made me sad to see a dead deer or possum, it was a common sight on this road, as both sides are open and with trees and undergrowth almost choking it. There are some parts of the road that almost became a sort of tunnel, due to the leaves intertwining above. It was incredibly easy for a deer or some other animal to jump out in front of a car in the dark, with neither party realizing until it was too late. I didn't have much luck. There were a few crows on the smear of a squirrel, and I saw a few ducks swimming the creek besides me, but nothing big. It was starting to get late, but the sun was still up, and despite the dangers of walking down a forest road in the dark, I was determined to stay out as long as possible. I decided to reach a small park area at the end of the road, and then I made my way back. I went under a small tunnel of leaves and came out the other side, and was delighted to see the familiar shape of a large bird in the sky circling. It was just the right shape and size to be a vulture, but I had no hope of checking the grayness of its feathers, as the sunlight was limited. Instead, I was stuck following it, as it slowly began to sink lower and lower. After about 10 or so minutes, it landed, and I carefully snuck forward, cautiously avoiding anything that could alert the bird of my presence. I sunk low to the ground, realizing that the bird had landed in a small clearing at the far end of a park. It was just a small open field, slightly tilted down a hill, with a parking lot on the top. I had been there before, as it was a fun spot for kids to roll down the hill because of how steep it was. I approached it from the bottom, excitement brimming, when I heard several squawks and shrieks of other birds. Black vultures are more aggressive than turkeys, and I was hoping to catch a spat. I got to the edge of the clearing and pulled up my binoculars. Two things kind of hit me here at once. One, I found it odd that they were in the middle of the park, rather than closer to the road, where you assume they'd find roadkill, though I reasoned things could die anywhere, right? Even in the middle of a park. However, secondly, it smelled awful. The scent was rather light, but I've been known to have a really sensitive nose, and just this sharp, coppery scent, like when you pull raw and ground meat out of a bag. I'd smelled roadkill before, and in the heat of the day, it smelled bad, but nothing like this. When I put my binoculars to my eyes, I expected a deer corpse and birds fighting. I never in a million years thought I would see a corpse of a completely different kind. The birds were there, and I remember the faint pang of excitement I still had, recognizing the proud head of a black vulture, before the image of it sitting on the chest of a naked woman sucked the life out of me. I was frozen, and I could not look away. My throat tightened with vomit, and I could not look away. The birds had done surprisingly little to her body. She had what I think were cuts, but most of her was intact. What wasn't, the birds were at. Her eyes, lips, and genitals were red and shredded. If there was a big defining wound, I missed it, between the gathering of birds and the fading light. But what I did see, I can never forget. I haven't forgotten. I can pull up the image so clearly now, even after all this time. She was pale, almost blue in places, with blonde, crinkled hair. I sat there stupidly for who knows how long, as the sun sunk behind the trees. This was a time before cell phones were a common thing, and I had quite the hike back home. I realized now I was in shock, and I could only move when the sudden fear that whoever did this could be nearby hit me. I forced myself to slowly waddle backwards into the trees, not taking my eyes off of the body. I didn't want to turn around for some reason. I was so scared someone would be behind me. I thought if I just backed up forever, maybe nothing would happen. It was dusk, and suddenly there was light. High beams from the top of the hill, a single pair. I heard the screech of the tires as the car wheeled out, and listened to it veer off to the left and away down the road, opposite in the direction I was headed. That was the last straw, and I ran the entire way back, the second I could no longer hear it. I crashed through at least a bunch of brush, a mile of it, and while I was smart enough to have boots and thick jeans on, my arms were bare and bleeding by the time I stopped. I paused midway through the brush by my house, realizing that, embarrassingly, I had pissed myself in fear at some point, before nearly crawling my way through people's yards to get home, avoiding all passing cars. The horror didn't completely end there, as I was home alone until past midnight, as my mom worked late at a diner nearby. It's stupid, and I regret it to this day, but no, I did not call the police instantly, nor my mom. I was stupidly afraid that if I did, my mom would get mad at me. I would never be allowed to go outside again, or worse, that they wouldn't believe me for some reason. I locked all the doors, double-checked, took a quick shower, and locked myself in my room. I had fallen asleep somehow by the time my mom came home. I confronted her in the morning at least, but by that time, when we made the call together, the body had already been found. They took my statement. We never got any calls back. I stopped birdwatching. I tried my best to find an article or news somewhere about this, but I failed in finding anything. It probably doesn't help that I can't remember the exact date. I have a lot of missing time from ages 12 to 14 for some reason, which I can't even begin to explain. There are very few things I remember so well, this being a big one. I've never shared this story with anyone outside of my own family, but I thought it might fit here, and I apologize if not. It was sort of therapeutic, I think, writing this out after so long. I'm going to keep trying to find something to verify this, so I'll update ASAP if I can.